The film begins without music, only the sound of the wind and the uneven rhythm of footsteps on frozen ground. A column of prisoners of war moves across the white Arkansas plain in January 1944. Their shadows stretch long in the cold morning. Snow crunches underfoot, except for one man. His steps are softer, uneven. The camera follows him until the sound changes, bare skin pressing into snow. Then silence. The soldier, Karl Brenner, once a mechanic in the 15th Panzer Division, stumbles and falls. His feet are blue, cracked, and blood has frozen between his toes. His boots were stolen 2 nights earlier during the chaotic surrender outside Cherbourg. He hasn't spoken since. The others march past him, avoiding his eyes. The guards hesitate. Orders say no one stops for the weak, yet one man does. Corporal James Hearne, 23, farm boy from Iowa, stands watching. His breath forms clouds that drift toward the dying German. No words, no gesture of power, only the quiet decision of someone raised to fix things that are broken. He kneels, unties his spare pair of army boots from his pack, the ones he's carried since Normandy, and places them beside the German. The leather is still warm from his body heat. Karl stares in disbelief. Hearne simply nods once and turns away, walking barefoot across the snow toward his post. No music swells, only wind, only breath. The camera lingers on Karl's trembling hands as they touch the boots. He slides his feet in slowly, half afraid it's a trick. Inside, the lining is dry, soft, still holding the scent of tobacco and machine oil. For the first time in days, he feels something other than pain, confusion, shame, gratitude, all at once. That 30 seconds of silence becomes everything. It is not a victory, not surrender, not charity. It is the raw meeting point of 2 human beings trapped inside a war larger than either can explain. The audience feels the shock of that contrast, cold steel discipline melting for a heartbeat into warmth. No dialogue needed, just the sound of the wind rising over snow and the image of one man walking barefoot so another might not die. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And tell me, where are you watching from tonight and what time is it there? That night, inside the small barracks of Camp Dermott, Arkansas, Corporal Hearne sits on his bunk polishing the boots that remained to him. The old pair, the ones he gave away, were not just any boots. They had once belonged to his closest friend, Private William Bill Carter, who died on June 7, 1944 in Normandy. When the medics carried Carter away, Hearne had taken the boots from beside his fallen friend, promising silently to keep them moving. The initials WC are still scratched faintly on the inside of the heel. Since that day, Hearne has carried 2 pairs, his own and Carter's. He wore them through France, across the Atlantic, all the way to this camp deep in the American South. Yet something about them has always been heavy. Each time he tied the laces, he remembered Carter's grin, his drawl, the way he'd once joked about walking home to Tennessee. Those boots had become ghosts that moved with him. Now, as he rubs the leather with oil, he realizes they are gone, not lost, but given. Outside the window, the snow has turned to thin rain. He can see the German prisoner limping across the yard, testing each step in the 2 large boots. Hearne doesn't feel pride, only a kind of relief, as though the weight of memory has passed on to someone who needs it more. In another corner of the camp, German POWs huddle over their tin cups of coffee, whispering about the strange kindness. They've seen guards feed stray dogs, but never share equipment. Some call it weakness, others say it's a trap. Karl Brenner, the man with the boots, says nothing. He only wipes the mud from the toes with the sleeve of his coat, noticing for the first time the faint initials carved inside. He wonders who WC was and why his enemy gave away the last trace of a friend. Harlan keeps Carter's letter folded in his breast pocket, the one written before D-Day. "If I fall, tell Ma I walked far enough." The words echo in his head. Maybe this, he thinks, was what that letter meant. To keep walking, even if it's someone else who takes the next steps. The boots, once soaked in Normandy's salt and blood, now tread Arkansas soil. The war has carried them across an ocean, across languages, across the line that separates the living from the dead. The camera lingers on their movement, each step slow, deliberate, echoing the pulse of a world trying to remember how to feel human again. And somewhere, in the silent gap between those steps, the meaning of victory shifts, no longer measured by flags or medals, but by what a man chooses to give away. At dawn, the frost still grips the wooden posts around the camp fence. Carl Brenner wakes with a start, the unfamiliar weight of leather on his feet reminding him this isn't a dream. He runs his fingers along the seams, tracing where the sole meets the heel, half expecting to find some hidden wire or insult carved inside. But there is nothing, only quiet workmanship, the kind he once took pride in as a mechanic before the war took his tools and gave him a rifle. He steps outside, snow crunching under the American boots. The guards barely glance at him. In Germany, this would have been impossible. A prisoner walking freely between barracks, a guard reading a newspaper instead of shouting orders. Something in him resists believing this calm. His whole life, he had been told the enemy was soulless, driven by greed and violence. But this ordinary decency, feels more dangerous than hatred. It begins to undo him. When the sun climbs higher, he sees Corporal Harlan again. The American is standing watch near the gate, his socks showing through the holes in his own worn boots. The leather creaks as he shifts his weight, bare toes almost visible. Carl realizes with a slow, stinging clarity that Harlan hasn't replaced what he gave away. The man truly walks unprotected on the frozen ground. That night, Carl cannot sleep. He lies awake listening to the wind scraping across the tin roof, each gust reminding him of that silent exchange. He remembers Stalingrad, how his unit once left behind a wounded Russian soldier in the snow because orders said to move on. They had convinced themselves mercy was weakness. Now he sees an American giving up comfort for an enemy's survival and wonders which side is truly strong. The next morning, during roll call, Harlan's commander notices the corporal's frostbitten feet and orders him to rest. Harlan waves it off. "I'm fine," he says, voice steady, though he limps slightly when he walks. Carl watches from afar, his chest tight with something he can't name. Pity, admiration, guilt, maybe all three. For the first time since capture, he feels the strange, unwanted desire to apologize, not for losing, but for believing so completely in something that turned him blind. The boots are warm now, molded to his shape. They fit as if they were always his, yet every step reminds him they're not. They belong to a man who refused to let him die of cold. And in that realization, a quiet truth begins to grow. Losing a war doesn't have to mean losing dignity. Sometimes it means rediscovering it in the hands of those you were taught to despise. Rain begins before dawn, drumming softly on the tin roofs of Camp Dermott. By mid-morning, puddles form between the barracks, and the guards huddle under tarps while the prisoners line up for their work details. The sky has turned the color of lead, pressing low and heavy over the camp. Carl Brenner stands by the fence, trying to keep the damp from soaking through the soles of his borrowed boots. Beside him, Corporal Harlan adjusts his poncho, his hair already plastered to his forehead. Their eyes meet briefly, not as captor and captive, but as two men enduring the same gray day. Harlan gestures toward the boots with a faint smile. "Holding up?" he asks. Carl nods, unsure if he's allowed to speak, then answers quietly, "They fit." His accent bends the words, but the meaning lands cleanly between them. Later that afternoon, as the rain eases into mist, Carl sits on an overturned crate near the latrine, threading a piece of thin wire through the broken lace of one boot. The wire comes from a scrap of fencing, twisted and sharp. Harlan walks by and stops. "You fix things," he says, half to himself. Carl looks up. "I was a mechanic. Before." Harlan nods, then sits down beside him, his own boots squelching in the mud. For a long while, neither speaks. Finally, Harlan asks, "Where were you stationed?" Carl answers, "Stalingrad." The word hangs between them like a ghost. Harlan exhales slowly. "Hell," he mutters. Carl chuckles dryly. "Different hell, same snow." It's the first time either man laughs, not loudly, not from joy, but from the shared exhaustion of people who have run out of hate. The rain thickens again, softening their outlines. They speak no more, only sit with the sound of water hitting metal and the faint smell of wet earth. The camp loudspeaker calls evening roll. Harlan stands, offering his hand without thinking. Carl hesitates, then grips it, rough against rough. "Now," he says in halting English, "we only have our feet left." Harlan smiles. "That's enough to walk home someday." The camera lingers on the wire laces glistening with rain. Two men, once enemies, now share silence that no language can fully hold. There are no speeches here, no redemption written in bold letters. Just the quiet rhythm of water and the slow understanding that survival means more than winning. In that moment, under gray Arkansas rain, the war feels very far away, and yet somehow closer than ever. Christmas Eve, 1944. The camp is wrapped in fog and faint light, the guard towers barely visible through the mist. Inside the recreation hall, someone has hung paper garlands made from ration wrappers and newspaper strips. The Americans have set up a small pine tree, trimmed with buttons, scraps of tinfoil, and the red ends of matchsticks. It is modest, fragile, and somehow beautiful. Carl Brenner sits near the back, his boots drying beside the stove. The leather has cracked, but they still hold warmth, the warmth of survival. Around him, hundreds of POWs sit in folding chairs, faces lit by the yellow glow of lanterns. At the front, Chaplain Miller opens a worn Bible, his voice trembling slightly as he begins to read. "Peace on earth, goodwill toward men." The German prisoners listen in uneasy silence, some staring at the floor, some mouthing silent prayers in their own tongue. Then, unexpectedly, someone begins to sing. It's a young German, voice thin but steady. "Stille Nacht, heilige Nacht." Within seconds, more join in, and the melody fills the hall like rising smoke. The Americans recognize it. Silent Night. One by one, they stand, their English lyrics weaving into the German ones. For a moment, the languages overlap perfectly, syllables melting into harmony. There is no translation needed. Harlan is in the doorway, arms folded, smiling faintly. Carl catches his eye. As the song softens, he removes his boots and sets them near the candles at the front, the cracked leather glinting in the light. He whispers, "For Frieden, for peace." Harlan, moved by something he can't explain, kneels briefly beside the boots and murmurs, "Amen." Outside, snow begins to fall again, soft as ash. The guards stop pacing. The floodlights hum quietly. From the distance, the camp no longer looks like a prison, just a cluster of glowing windows surrounded by endless white. Historical records confirm that on Christmas Eve 1944, several POW camps across America held joint services where German and American soldiers sang together. No politics, no uniforms, just human voices remembering the sound of home. Carl later writes in his diary, "I saw men who should hate me, but they sang the same prayer. I think perhaps God does not take sides." When the candles burn low, the boots remain there at the foot of the tree, as if keeping vigil. They have crossed oceans, borders, and ideologies. And tonight, they become something else entirely. A relic not of war, but of the fragile, miraculous peace born in a single shared song. Would you, watching this, have offered yours? Spring 1946. The war is over. The trains now run not toward the front, but toward home. Camp Dermott stands half empty, its fences rusting in the southern humidity. German prisoners are being processed for repatriation, a line of tired faces carrying small bundles of belongings. Among them walks Karl Brenner, his frame thinner than before, his uniform faded to gray. Around his neck hangs a tag marked Repatriation Group 21B. In his hands, he carries the boots, the same pair that once saved his feet, that walked him through fields and seasons, that sang silently through Christmas nights. The soles are nearly gone, the laces replaced twice, the initials WC still visible under the tongue. He pauses before boarding the truck, looking back one last time toward the camp gate. Corporal Hearne stands there, leaning against a post, his hair now longer, sunburned, his expression unreadable. Carl approaches, boots held forward like an offering. "They belong to you," he says softly. Hearne shakes his head. "No, they've been yours longer than mine." Carl insists, pressing them into his hands. "They helped me live. Now they should rest." Tucked inside one boot is a small folded note. Hearne doesn't open it until later that night after the truck has gone. The handwriting is cramped, uneven, but steady. "One day I will walk in peace. Until then, let these remember the road we shared." Weeks later, back in Iowa, Hearne tries the boots on. They no longer fit. They are stretched, misshapen, too wide now. He laughs quietly to himself. "Guess he walked farther than I did." The sound fades, replaced by silence, and in that silence lies the realization that peace, like leather, changes shape with whoever wears it. For Carl, the road home winds through a ruined Germany. He arrives in Bremen to find his house flattened, his father gone, his sister missing. But he still keeps a pair of worn American socks, the first dry thing he'd been given as a prisoner. He places them in a small wooden box with his dog tags and writes above it, "Not everything the enemy takes is yours to lose." For years, both men carry fragments of that winter. Hearne tends a small shoe repair stall in town after the war, quietly fixing soles and heels, refusing payment from veterans. Carl rebuilds tractors in a burned-out barn, working in silence, never joining the new political factions that rise. Both men walk barefoot sometimes, not from poverty, but to remember. So when the war ended, the boots no longer fit. Not because their feet changed, but because they themselves had. What would you have done with them? Kept them as proof of mercy, or let them go to keep walking? Decades pass. The world rebuilds itself and forgets its own scars, one layer of concrete at a time. It is 1978 when a curator at the Camp Hearne POW Museum in Texas opens a donated crate marked Estate of Corporal James Hearne. Inside are medals, ration cards, and one pair of boots, cracked, brown, faintly stamped WC near the heel. Tucked inside is a note yellowed by time, written in 2 languages. The first line reads, "These boots walked across two enemies' hearts and left no hate behind." They are placed in a glass case between a captured German helmet and a faded American field jacket. At first, few visitors notice them. Then one day, an elderly man with a German accent stops, bends closer, and whispers, "Karl Brenner." His son, now a professor in Houston, nods in recognition. "My father told me about them," he says. "He said the boots came from a man who gave away his comfort so another could live." The museum records the story, verifying Harlan's service file and Brenner's prisoner number. Both men have long since died within a year of each other. Harlan in 1968 of heart failure, Brenner in 1969 from pneumonia. Yet somehow their paths cross again through this relic of leather and silence. The camera moves slowly through the museum. Children on a school trip press their faces to the glass. Their teacher reads the inscription aloud, her voice soft. "These boots walked across two enemies' hearts." She pauses. "Does anyone know what that means?" A small girl raises her hand and says, "Maybe it means they forgave each other." The teacher smiles, unsure whether to nod or cry. Outside, rain streaks the glass windows of the museum, just as it once streaked the barracks roof. Each droplet catches the light, and for a brief moment, it looks as if the boots themselves are weeping. The sound of quiet footsteps echoes through the hall. Tourists moving slowly, respectfully. No speeches, no flags, no grand memorials. Just a pair of boots that outlived their owners, outlived the ideologies that tried to divide them. They stand there, mute and unpolished, carrying more truth than any uniform ever could. And as the film fades, the camera lingers on the glass reflection. The old boots, the visitors, the rain, all layered together until the viewer can no longer tell which side of history they are on. Because mercy, once given, never truly belongs to one side. It keeps walking. The story of the boots is small. So small it could be lost between the pages of history books that count battles, victories, and nations. Yet it endures, precisely because it belongs not to generals or speeches, but to two men who discovered that compassion can survive even in captivity. One gave up warmth, the other gave up pride. Between them stood no treaty, no flag, only a silent act that rewrote what it meant to be human in a time of dehumanization. Long after the war, both men lived ordinary lives, one repairing shoes in Iowa, the other fixing engines in Bremen. They never saw each other again, but each carried something invisible, a quiet certainty that kindness had once crossed the line of fire. When they died, the war was history, yet their brief moment of mercy still breathed through a pair of boots resting in glass, still capable of moving hearts that never saw a battlefield. History often teaches us who won. Rarely does it teach us who chose not to hate, but it is in those rare gestures, a shared song in a prison hall, a meal divided, a pair of boots given without words, that humanity proves itself indestructible. The lesson does not age. Empathy is not weakness, and peace does not begin with governments. It begins with one man deciding not to turn away. Somewhere tonight, in another time of division, there may be another pair of hands offering warmth to a stranger. And perhaps, far in the future, another museum will hold another relic, not of war, but of a single decision to remain human when it would have been easier not to.